Okay, so welcome everybody, and thanks for coming along to today's session. So my name is Jeremy Davis. I'm the head of communications and impact at the Fatherhood Institute, and I'm really happy to be chairing today's webinar. All too often, fathers are an afterthought in family services, or they're thought about as a problematic minority group, rather than as 50% of parents and people whose impact on children is enormous, and who therefore deserve to be built into the support we provide to families, and especially in families experiencing various forms of disadvantage. So this is the first of two free Family Hubs webinars we're running. The second one is next week, and we'll be sharing details of that one at the end of today's session. This is a quick summary of what we're going to inspire you with today, I hope. We have three brilliant speakers, all experts in their field, and each will present for about 10 to 15 minutes. They'll be sharing some great insights that I hope you will find useful as you reflect on and plan your Family Hub services. If you have any questions, could you please put them into the chat, and we'll do our best to get to them at the end of the session, time permitting. If we do run out of time, we'll try to post some answers after the event on Twitter using the hashtags that you see here. So hashtag Family Hubs and hashtag Time with Dad. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce our first speaker, Adrienne Burgess, who is the head of research and one of the founders of the Fatherhood Institute. She knows so much about fathers, fatherhood, couple relationships, and gender equality, it's almost frightening. Her landmark book, Fatherhood Reclaimed, was published in 1997. And since then, she's worked tirelessly to build the evidence base and rationale for father-inclusive services and practice in perinatal, early years, education, and social care. In 2014, for example, she co-authored with a team from Yale University a global review of parenting programs, which found, in a nutshell, that dads were being ignored and money wasted because outcomes are best when both parents are engaged and opportunities are lost when they're not. Over recent years, Adrienne has been leading the Nuffield-funded Contemporary Fathers in the UK project, a groundbreaking series of evidence reviews about fathers and fatherhood in the UK. Today, she's going to focus on the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on father-child relationships. So, Adrienne, over to you.
Good morning, good middle of the day. It's great to be here. Thank you. I'm going to share my screen now, and we'll see how we go. Oh, why am I not seeing it? When I found it, I had it completely there. Sorry about this. This wastes time, and I'm very cross. Is open. Let's try that again. Let's try that again. Share screen. Here it is. Right, okay. So this was a very exciting thing. I'm going to put it on the slideshow from the beginning and talk to a couple of slides, and then we're going to show you a small video. So what happened to COVID dads? We were very excited when the lockdowns happened, because it dawned on us almost immediately that what we were going to see was a sort of natural experiment being underway, because fathers had last been mainly in the home environment, working from or around their homes in the sort of late 18th century, so around 1790. And then industrialization started, and gradually the fathers and other breadwinners moved out of the family home. And the great historian Peter Laslett said that this was the most profound thing that happened to the family in the process of industrialization. So we thought, wow, the dads are going back home again. This is amazing. So we said to Nuffield, our funder, we'd like to do this. And they said, okay, we'll give you some funding. It wasn't a great deal, but it was enough. And let's see what you can do. So first of all, we did a review of the literature as the year and the first couple of years progressed. We summarized everyone else's findings on mothers and fathers during the lockdown. It wasn't a great deal. Mostly they did women and men, but we looked at the work that did mothers and fathers. And we summarized that in the report, and you'll find it in the report if you look at it, and I give you the link at the end of this presentation. The other thing we did was to do our own quantitative research via a polling organization called Britain Thinks, who just get you a sample weighted the way you want, not weighted, they do weight it, but to make it representative of the UK, you give them the parameters and they do it. So it was a nationally representative sample of 2,045 fathers of under 12 children. So it wasn't babies, it was all over. We surveyed them in June 2020 following the first UK lockdown. Now, at that time, as we had thought, when we thought about this dad's returning home bit, 73% were at home full time. Very few had lost their jobs. They were mainly furloughed or working from home. 27% were still going out to work full time. Just to give you a sort of thing of comparison here, before the lockdown, about 6 to 8% had been working mainly from home. And suddenly you've got 73% full time at home. So we also had 4 categories of dads. We didn't analyze, we analyzed them all together. But that wasn't very useful. We did it just because we might as well, but we also did them in sections. So the bulk of them, and this represented the population at large, were partnered fathers in father-mother households with one under 12 child living with them full time. They could be stepfathers, they could be fathers, and we did ask about their relationship to the child. It was a smaller, much smaller, but actually in numbers representative number of what we call now own household fathers. These were involved own household fathers. We're using the term own household father instead of separated or non-resident. We don't use separated because sometimes fathers had never actually been in a relationship with the mother of their child from the beginning. So they didn't separate. They were just living in their own household, not one they own, but one that they inhabit when the baby was born. Own household fathers, we don't like non-resident because actually a lot of these fathers have the children to stay in their household. So though they're not co-resident with the mum, they are resident with their child for part of the time. And we never use absent fathers because actually hardly any of them are absent. About 4% of fathers of very young children, 18 months and under, don't see their child regularly. I mean, 4%, not of own household fathers, but of all fathers, in your area, and looking at areas of quite high disadvantage, only about 4% of the dads are neither living with their children nor living separately, but in contact. So we had that group, and that was very interesting. We also wanted to look at fathers of colour. So again, the polling organisation found us a number, 261, which was representative across, proportionately out of 2,000 fathers across the UK. Unfortunately, we just couldn't get a bigger sample. We didn't have enough money. When you break that down to Asian, Black and mixed heritage, and a few Chinese as well, there were tiny samples. So we couldn't say anything about individual different and ethnic groups, but we can say something about fathers of colour, who are a unified group in the sense that all of them are disadvantaged. The other thing that came up, which was very odd actually, was that we said to the polling organisation, could we please have, we'd like to see some fathers who are raising children without mothers, but in couple households, because they're looking at we were looking at couple households. We'd like to have some, and amazingly, they put it out on their communications system, and 156 fathers who were in two father households with at least one child living with them full time came forward. And this as a group was worth definitely looking at, and we were really excited. Okay, we're going to talk later about interesting findings about these groups, but in the meantime, Jeszemma is I'm going to stop sharing, and Jeszemma is going to show you a short video which presents, she made it, she and Jeremy actually made it, which I think is brilliant, and it shows you the findings from our survey. Over to you, Jess. So thank you very much for that. Very moving stuff. We found it. We were amazed. you know, the fathers had to do loads more and did step up to the plate. You very rarely hear that data. I don't know why. There is generally a kind of desire, I think, to portray mothers as real victims. So I'm now going to just tell you very briefly, because I'm already out of time, about these three groups of fathers, just so that you have some information. And then I'm going to talk about what is happening now, what's been sustained, what fathers were doing before the lockdowns and what they're doing now. So with these own household fathers, that's the separated dads, it's a real tale of disadvantage. 22% of them, compared with 14% of fathers in mother-father household, had not been in paid work before lockdown. 31% compared with 41% of fathers in mother-father couple households were educated to degree level, so they're much less likely to have higher education. 44% of these men were living in a household which in which they weren't with a new partner or anything. In fact, hardly any of them had a new partner. They were living in shared housing, or they were living with their parents. They were very disadvantaged and very fragile in terms of their housing. And only 25% had a new partner. Then we wanted to look at the black fathers, and what we found here was that 4/5. It was quite a happy picture. 4/5 compared with 3/5 of white fathers felt closer to their children after lockdown. And we think that may be due to the fact that these fathers were less likely to be in employment, in fact, and so spent more time at home than white fathers. Almost all partnered fathers, whether they're whatever their ethnicity, report positive relationships with their partner. You know, you hear so much stuff about relationships being dreadful, but actually all the surveys show this, that most people who are living together or in a relationship with the partner say that it's pretty satisfactory. I think the reason is the ones who didn't find it satisfactory have probably left. But what was interesting about the fathers of colour, that they were more likely to report improvements in the couple relationship following lockdown. Finally, I want to talk about the fathers. They were all gay fathers in two father households. And it was a very interesting picture because they were a grumpy lot, I have to tell you. They were not as happy as many of the other fathers. And when we looked at this, we had to work out why. So what we realised, we'd asked all the fathers to describe whether they just saw themselves as the main carer in the household or as a supportive carer, the secondary carer. And overall, in the fathers in the mother-father households, 18% said that they were the main carer. So it's about average. That's about right. But 40 among the in the two father households, 43% were the main rather than secondary caregivers. So what you're hearing from in their replies is the response of main caregivers. It's not about their sexuality or really, it's just about what position, what role they hold. Because we often hear that mothers are not as happy as fathers in surveys about all kinds of things, but really it's about the role. The primary caregivers are not as happy. So you're going to get this whole thing, so I won't spend the time going through this point, but I want you to look at it because it's really interesting stuff. It's a main caregiver response, and they felt they weren't learning so much from being at home with their kids, probably because they saw themselves as being at home much more with their children beforehand. And similarly, they weren't so happy with they didn't feel with couple relationship, various things that you need to look at there, and that's good. Now I just want to finish off by talking to you about what the landscape looks like pre-pandemic to post-pandemic. This is not our data. This is the Office for National Statistics, the ONS data. And I want to say that the big change has come about through the fact that although you hear lots about everyone having to return to the office, in fact, working from home has remained really stubbornly there. It's, of course, more in advantaged households and more likelihood to work from home. But before the pandemic, as we said, about 6% of the time that fathers spent in paid work was spent from home. That's the time, that's not the number of, and now 37% is spent from home. And of course, that saves time on commuting, which is absolutely huge. So here we have our results. Nowadays, working fathers spend almost 2/3 of the time that working mothers spend exclusively on unpaid childcare. So for every hour a mother does, the father's doing about 40 minutes. Before the lockdown, he was doing just over 30 minutes. You know, for that to have happened in 2 years is a huge shift. Similarly, if you look at unpaid domestic work, they're now doing 2/3 of what working mothers spend on unpaid domestic work. And again, that's up from just over half of what mothers were doing pre-pandemic. But the mother's work has also changed in a very positive way that's actually helping us with gender equality. So the mothers now spend 3/4 of the time that working fathers spent on paid work, which was up from 67% pre-pandemic. So they're edging up to be able to be equal with the dads, and of course that's key to gender equality. The interesting thing is, another very interesting thing is travel. Fathers' commutes have always been known to be much longer than mothers. One of the things that disadvantage mums is that they pick jobs closer to home, and that they're often don't have such a great choice. So what you used to find that mothers were doing about 67% of the time spent on commuting, the dads were spending. But now they've gone up to 92% of the time. And we think that's partly because a lot of the fathers has reduced. So if you want to find the report, you look at it on our website under the Contemporary Fathers in the UK page, and you'll find it in 3 ways: an executive summary, the condensed report, and the full report. The condensed report is fine, but you get more detail in the full report. Thank you very much for listening.
Great stuff. Thanks, Adrienne. And I mean, you'll agree that there was a lot in there. So do find your way to our website to find out more details on there. And if you do have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat and we'll hopefully get to them at the end. Okay, so our next speaker is Jeszemma Howl, who is Head of Training at the Fatherhood Institute. Jez comes from an early years background, and she has a long history of developing innovative, inclusive, ground level work with fathers in children's centres, maternity services, schools, and social work departments in diverse communities. What Jez doesn't know about building and maintaining evidence-based, father-inclusive services ain't worth knowing. Today, she's going to talk to us about one of our father-focused interventions, Fathers Reading Every Day. So over to you, Jez.
Thank you so much. I will, like everybody else, faff about sharing slides. Here we go. I have given myself the challenge to talk for 10 minutes on why 10 minutes really matters. So we're going to talk today about Fathers Reading Every Day. It's a reading programme for fathers and their children. It lasts 4 weeks. It's a home-based reading programme. It works with any father or father figure, so anyone the child sees as a father to them. It can work with any age child from birth onwards. We've even seen it work before the baby is born. And it's mainly delivered in family services, so children's centres, nurseries, schools, libraries, family support, prisons, the big lottery sites. And it can work as a group-based programme, but it can also work as a home visiting programme, so working with individual families. How it works is fathers are given a reading diary. where they log what they read and how long for. It includes ideas and tips on reading with your children. And crucially, why this is important, fathers, as a general, get less information, less advice, less support. So we have to be quite blatant with this. Dads, what you do really matters. It's very light touch and positive and encouraging and celebratory, because almost all fathers of young children are involved with their child's literacy and other development activities at home, even if they're not sure how to help. So it's important that any intervention acknowledges this and builds on it, on father's existing knowledge, his skills, his cultures, his participation, rather than approaching fathers as if they aren't involved at home and aren't interested. I love this bottom quote from a child. Normally, I wouldn't get the opportunity to be read to, but Daddy enjoys me listening to him. He's seen the joy that Daddy gets while he reads fantastic books. So this is how it works. Fathers read at home with their child for a set time every day for 4 weeks. The average is 10 minutes a day. It rises to 20 minutes for the last 2 weeks. They can read anything and anywhere. They can read menus, magazines, books, reading apps. They can read instruction books. I've had a dad read a Land Rover magazine to a new baby. It all works. And they can read anywhere. They can read on the bus, in the car park, they can read in the bath, at bedtime, of course, but just to expand these reading experiences, absolutely anywhere. A lot of services do a wild reading competition where the dads and the children take a photo of them reading in quite bizarre places. They can read in any language at all, it all helps. They jot down what they've read and for how long, and all of these achievements are celebrated at the end of the 4 weeks. Contacts made with fathers during these 4 weeks to see how they're doing. They have a bingo card so they can tick off lots of different fun activities. You can bring them in and do have a guest reader, do choral reading, you can do book swaps, but ultimately it is just dads at home reading anything. So why do this? Studies across the world have found that fathers' involvement with their children is linked with higher educational achievement. And when fathers of 1- and 2-year-olds read lots of books to them, their children tend to be more interested in books later on. Preschoolers whose dads read and talk to them a lot behave and concentrate better at nursery, and they do better in maths as well. And this continues, so at age 5, their children know and use more words, they can pick out letters more accurately, and they're better at problem solving. And by 10, their vocabulary is wider, and again, their math skills are better. But low interest by fathers in their child's education has a stronger negative impact on their achievement than contact with the police, poverty, family types, social class, housing tenure, and the child's personality. So is there something dads do that's so different to what mothers do? There is some evidence around this. Studies have found that while mothers tend to focus on the content of the book they're reading, fathers' reading time conversations with children are more wide-ranging and often can bring in topics from outside contexts. Mothers may ask children convergent questions about the facts or events in the book they're reading, but fathers pose more abstract questions that challenge children to use their imagination or connect what they're reading to the outside experiences. And a lot of what dads do is about connecting children to the outside social world. While time read to by mothers is correlated with traditional emergent reading behaviours, it's time read to by fathers that can predict better language development, which is the foundation of reading comprehension, all of which is a huge and rich resource for fathers. But fathers are seldomly seen in literacy programs. And what Fred does is really focus. It focuses the service and it focuses the fathers. So the outcomes, this is from the DFE pilot. Fathers spent 70% more time reading with their children. Fred children were 4 times more likely than their peers to make greater than expected progress. Children on free school meals or pupil premium made the greatest progress. High numbers of boys took part. 86% of dads finished the programme. That's very high for any parenting programme. And 1/3 of dads said they now spend more and better quality time with their children. Looking at one setting, this is a setting in an inner city environment that 180 children went through Fred here. 86% of those children had English as an additional language. Post-Fred, 97% say that taking part in Fred has helped them to read to their child every day. 96 say their child is now choosing a book or something to look at more often. 96% say they've noticed their child having longer conversations using new words. Here's the biggies. 91% say they feel more connected. And this goes back to what Adrienne was saying about time. This more time with children means they feel more connected. So they know when their child needs a cuddle. There's more eye contact. They understand their child's mood. And 87% say they speak to and sing and laugh more with their children and feel more confident in reading books or telling stories. Now, we can read anything during Fred, anything at all, but books are still being picked up. So books were read nearly 2,500 times during this one round of Fred. I can bet it's the Gruffalo 1,000 times. What does Fred do for boys and girls? We wanted to know what happened to the reading gap. So if you look at this graph, boys are in blue, girls are in orange. If you look on the right-hand side, you'll see for reading and literacy, there is a gap. It's about 10%. The local authority average in this evaluation was about the same, but the Fred cohort closed the gap. They closed the gap with one round. Listening, again, a gap nationally, a gap in the local authority. With this Fred cohort so close to closing the gap, we're about 2 or 3% off. Managing feelings, again, quite large gap nationally and in the local authority. Hardly anything in the Fred cohort, it's 1%. And here's ever such an interesting one, making relationships. So the national average there's a 10% gap there between boys and girls. The local authority average, again, just slightly higher there. The Fred cohort, boys exceeded girls on this one. There was no boy-girl gap. In fact, the boys exceeded the girls. Just before I finish, some nice quotes from fathers that are quite telling, I think. I feel more confident. It's encouraged me to read. A wonderful phrase, it's awoken me to do so. I can't read very well, and I don't normally look at books, but looking at the books with my children has definitely helped me, and I feel more confident. It's gave me confidence. The information I was given regarding reading to my children and how important it is, it's given me courage and a closer bond. I didn't have much of a bond with my youngest two, as they was all mum. Now I look forward to story time and enjoy that 2 hours daddy time just to relax with them. So just to recap, there are really positive outcomes for children with Fred and for father-child relationships. And it can kick-start relationships between services and fathers, which we must build on. Father-specific services like Fred, wonderful, but not wonderful if that's the only way we're going to work with dads. And this early involvement pays dividends later for children, for fathers, and for services. I have managed to do it in 10 minutes. For more information, please do a search for Fred on our website, but also do a Google search. You'll come up with lots of really interesting case studies, newspaper articles, lots of things. There's lots of films on the YouTube channel of dads talking about the impact Fred has had. Or you can email me for more information and let me talk longer. I love talking about Fred. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jez. I love Fred. We love Fred, don't we, Jez? We love Fred a lot. Okay, well, I hope that's inspired you to go and have a look at the website and find out some more about Fred. I'm going to move us on now to our final speaker, who is Dr. Helen Norman, who is a senior research fellow at Leeds University Business School. Her research focuses on father and fatherhood, the gendered division of labour, and gender inequalities in work, employment, and family life. In her previous work based at Manchester University, Helen explored what influences fathers' involvement in childcare and housework. More recently, she's been researching the impact of the pandemic on early years childcare. And she's also principal investigator on a wonderful ESRC funded project called Peace, exploring whether, how, and at what stage fathers' childcare involvement might affect children's attainment at primary school. In today's talk, Helen is going to be telling us more about Peace, which is a fascinating and important study. So, Helen, it's over to you.
Thank you very much for that introduction. Let me share my screen. Just gonna try and get it to the. All right, let me just change the. Is that? Can everybody see that? Right. Can you see that, Jeremy? Yeah.
That's working. Can I also just ask everybody to check they're muted as well, because there was a bit of feedback coming through before. So if you can just make sure you're all on mute. Thank you. Okay, thanks, Jeremy. So yeah, I'm going to be talking about some of my research that looks at paternal involvement and its effects on children's education. So this is kind of what I'm going to cover. I'm not going to speak for longer than 50 minutes. I'm going to sort of introduce the project, talk about the research questions, some of the data, and then I'm going to present a kind of conceptual model that shows you what we're going to do with that data and how we're looking at this, and then some of the sort of headline findings from that. So I'm going to start with some data from the Time Use Survey. So this is from the 2015 Time Use Survey. And it shows the differences between mothers and fathers' time spent on paid and unpaid work. And I know Adrienne showed some more recent data about the effects of the pandemic, but this is kind of like just a broad kind of
pattern that we're seeing that's not really changed massively over time. And you can see that there's a very clear gender gap in time use. So on average, fathers still spend about double the amount of time on paid work, whereas mothers spend about double the amount of time on unpaid work, on things like housework and childcare. So it kind of remains the case that whilst fathers are spending more time on childcare and housework than previous generations of fathers did, so the time they're spending is going up, they are still doing much less than mothers. So what we have is a very gendered division of paid and unpaid work, and this has kind of been apparent for many years. Now, we can't conclude that this is solely because fathers don't want to contribute to some of this work, especially with regards to childcare, which is considered one of the more rewarding activities. And indeed, this data here from the Millennium Cohort Study, this is data that we're using for our project, so I'll talk a bit more in detail about this later. This captures fathers in two-parent mother-father households with a dependent child age 5. And it shows that when dads were asked about how they feel about the amount of time they have to spend with their children, 3/5 of them, that's 59%, said they spent either nowhere near enough time or not quite enough time with their children. So this suggests that fathers want to spend more time with their children, but there are various barriers that impact on the ability of fathers to be involved as they'd like to be. And of course, some of the reasons for this kind of disproportionate amount of time that fathers spend on childcare might be to do with the father themselves. It might be to do with their confidence, their motivation, you know, how much they want to be involved. But there are other types of structural barriers in place that prevent them from being as involved as they'd like. So things like long hours of paid work, difficulties in accessing flexible work, and their sort of perceptions about the availability of flexible work to them, it's much that they tend to be much lower compared to mothers. Dads just feel that it's not an option for them, so they don't request it. Unsupportive line managers, poor parental leave provisions, cultural norms around fathering roles, the gender pay gap. It makes more financial sense for the lower earner, which tends to be the woman, to take on more of the childcare and housework and adapt her work accordingly. Things like parental relationship conflict, all these things can impact on how involved a father can be. And we know that these barriers vary across fathers. So some are more pronounced for some fathers, less pronounced for other fathers. So what effect might this variability in fathers' involvement have on children? And this question about how fathers' involvement affects children and their children's development is kind of the broad question that we're concerned with in our project, given we know fathers' involvement tends to be more variable than mothers' involvement. So as I said at the start, we know fathers spend more time on childcare than previous generations of fathers, but some are more involved than others. And the implications on this, on children, are unclear. So research shows that parents' childcare involvement is critical for supporting children's development, but this is a conclusion largely drawn from research conducted with mothers or parents more generally. And that body of research finds that engagement in educational or structured types of activities with the child, like reading, playing sports, doing arts and crafts, that has an association with better primary school grades and skills as opposed to engagement in unstructured activities like watching the TV. We know from the evidence from Jez, from Fred, that reading in particular with fathers, that has a positive effect. But what about everything else? You know, what is the evidence to show whether and how fathers impact on their children's education independently of mothers? We think paternal involvement might have different consequences for child development. Perhaps it supports progression in particular academic subjects. Perhaps it helps to close gender gaps in attainment. Perhaps it could even help to reduce the negative effects of poverty. So this is where our project called PEACE comes in, paternal involvement and its effects on children's education. It's a 2-year funded ESRC project. and involves researchers from Manchester, Leeds and the Fatherhood Institute's very own Jeremy Davis. So these are the core research questions that we're exploring using data from the Millennium Cohort Study, which I'll talk a bit about next. So we're interested in whether fathers' involvement increases children's primary school attainment, and if so, what stage of the child's life this is most important, whether fathers' involvement has a different effect on boys and girls, whether fathers' involvement reduces the negative effects of poverty, and what sorts of childcare activities are most important. So today I'm just going to focus on our broader question about whether fathers' involvement increases primary school attainment. Now, I'm not going to present any complex statistics or complex statistical models, but rather I'm just going to show you our kind of conceptual model, which explains what we're doing with the data. Then I'm just going to summarize the headlines from that. But if anybody is very keen to see the stats, see the intricacies of that model, just let me know. I can share that with you. And they're also, the results are available in another presentation on our website. So the data that we use is from the Millennium Cohort Study. It's a nationally representative household panel survey. It follows children born from when they were born around the year 2000. So for the project, we're using the first 5 sweeps of data up to when the child is aged 11. And this data has been linked to the educational records of children. So the early years foundation stage profile at age 5 and key stage assessments at age 7 and 11. So this means we can track quite long father involvement and educational trajectories for a fairly large sample of households. So for the analysis today, I'm focusing on households that are in TAP for the first 3 MCS sweeps. And the analysis focuses on the first year of primary school when children are aged 5. So this is the sweep 3 of MCS data. Now, before I show you the conceptual model, this slide shows a bit of information about how we're actually measuring fathers' and mothers' involvement. So our measures can very broadly be thought of as composite measures that are basically made up of several individual variables that measure how often a father does certain activities with his child, how often he reads, plays toys, draws, paints, etc. And all these measures are exactly the same for the mother. So we end up with a kind of composite scale of involvement that's the same for mothers, the same for fathers, so we can compare them. And these capture the core educational structured activities that I mentioned earlier that are shown to be good for a child's development. So this is the conceptual model. So this is as complicated as I'm going to get, and I'm going to just explain what this is doing. So this looks at whether fathers and mothers' involvement affects children's attainment in the early years foundation stage profile at age 5. So let me just explain what this is showing. So our fathers and mothers' involvement composite measures are shown in those ovals there. So this is these measures here, capturing all those childcare activities. And the arrows connecting them to attainment at the top and bottom show that we're looking at the direct effects fathers and mothers' involvement has on attainment at age 5. And attainment at age 5 is measured as the overall score that a child achieves in the early years foundation stage profile, which is the standard assessment for all children at the start of primary school at age 5. But because we think relationship is going to be influenced by the child themselves, about their behaviour, we include 5 measures of the child's behaviour shown in those rectangles. So this is a standard way of measuring the strengths and difficulties in children. So the measures in order on the slide capture the child's strengths and difficulties in their emotions, in their conduct, in their hyperactivity, in their peer socialization, which is about how well they get on with other children, in their pro-social behaviour, which are things like how readily they share with other children. So in summary, this model is looking at how fathers and mothers' involvement affects attainment at age 5, shown by the top and bottom direct arrows, how fathers and mothers' involvement affects the child's behaviour at age 5, shown by the first set of arrows to the rectangular boxes, and how child behaviour affects attainment at age 5, shown by the second set of arrows. So we're looking at both direct and the indirect effects from fathers' and mothers' involvement via child's behaviour. And the beauty of this sort of model is everything's calculated at the same time. So we can see what's important, what's not important, what is the strongest, the weakest effect, and so on. But at the same time, we can account for lots of other variables that might affect attainment. And I've listed those on the bottom of the slide there. Things like the gender and the ethnicity of the child, the age in the school year, household income, and so on. So this means we can explore relationships between fathers and mothers' involvement in attainment, but also account for lots of other things that are likely to have some bearing on attainment too. Okay, so I'm just going to summarise some of the headline results of what our model shows, but happy to share the actual stats if anyone is interested. So what we're finding is both fathers and mothers' involvement is important, but they seem to affect the child's development in different ways. So whilst the father's involvement has a positive direct effect on the child's attainment at age 5, the mother's involvement has a positive effect on the child's behaviour. So if we go back to our diagram, that first arrow linking father's involvement and attainment is important, and the arrows linking the mother's involvement and the child's behaviour is important. So in other words, when father's child involvement goes up, children's attainment goes up. And this is the case even when we account for other things that might affect attainment that are listed on the slide: gender, ethnicity, age in the school year, so on and so on. So this means our headline is, of the parents, the one that is the most important for supporting the child's educational achievements at age 5 is the father. Now, this isn't a cut and dry finding, because if you look at our model, everything is linked together. So if we were to take the mothers out of that model, the effect from the father's involvement might disappear. So in other words, it might be that the mothers are kind of the enabler of the father's involvement here. Without the mother framing, say, the child's pro-social behaviour, the father might not have his chance to foster the child's educational achievement. So it's just basically saying everything is all part of a system, but within that system, the father's involvement is the most important for the educational attainment. So to finish, I'm just going to conclude. We know father's involvement has advantages for children in two-parent households in terms of their educational development, but it's also clear that there are barriers for fathers who can't be as involved as others. I've just seen the time. I know we've only got 5 minutes, so I'm just going to leave these here. These are some recommendations where we could start to address in order to tackle some of this. Now, some of these are kind of macro level policy changes that we, the Fatherhood Institute, have been arguing for years about changing the parental leave system, but there's also organisational changes down to easy access to flexible working, limits to long hours of work, and also down to things that schools and educational providers can do, like being more father inclusive, including father friendly resources, events and activities, and so on. I'm going to have to stop there because I see we've only got 5 minutes, but please do check out our website and give us a follow if you want to find out more. Thank you.